I played the voicemail 3 times before I accepted what I was actually hearing. Not because the audio was unclear. Not because my brother was whispering. He was perfectly calm, which was somehow worse. "We've made a decision as a family," he said. "You're not part of this anymore. Don't come to the house. We'll handle things from here." That was it. 34 seconds. Then silence. I set my phone face down on my kitchen counter and stood there for a moment, looking at nothing. I want to say I cried. I want to say I called someone or sat down or did anything that a normal person would do after hearing something like that from her own brother. But I didn't. I just stood there, very still, and something inside me went quiet in a way it never had before. Not broken quiet, decided quiet. Let me back up, because this didn't start with a voicemail. It never does. My name is not important. What is important is that I am the oldest of 3 children. I am 31 years old. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and for the past 4 years, I have been the person my family called when something needed to be fixed. Not my brother Marcus, who is 28, and has never held a job longer than 8 months. Not my sister Diane, who is 25, and still asks my mother to make her dentist appointments. Me. Always me. I work in financial compliance. I know how money moves, how documents work, how to read the fine print on things that most people sign without blinking. My family knew this about me. I want to be honest, for a long time, I let them use it. It started 4 years ago when my parents told me they wanted to move out of their rental in Greensboro and finally own something. My father is 63, my mother is 59. They had rented their whole lives, and I understood what it meant to them to have something with their name on it before my father retired. I wanted that for them too, I genuinely did. The problem was their credit. Years of late payments, a car repossession in 2019, and a small business loan my father defaulted on had left them essentially unqualifiable for a mortgage on their own. When they explained this to me, they weren't asking me to fix it, not yet, they were just telling me. Or at least that's how it felt. It was Marcus who said it first. We were all at my parents' house for Easter, sitting on the back porch, and he said it the way he always says things casually, like it was obvious, like he had already thought it through even though you could tell he hadn't. "Claire could just co-sign," he said. "Or put it in her name. She's got the credit." Everyone looked at me. I should have said no. I want to be very clear about that. I should have said I love you all and I want this for you, but I cannot put my name on a 30-year mortgage for a house I don't live in. I knew the risk. I knew exactly what I was doing when I didn't say that. What I said instead was, "Let me look into it." And that was the beginning. The house they found was a 3-bedroom Craftsman in Greensboro, about 12 minutes from where they were already renting. My parents loved it immediately. My mother cried at the showing. My father walked around the backyard twice without saying anything, which is what he does when something matters to him. The asking price was $260,000. I was the one who negotiated. I was the one who gathered the documents, submitted the application, handled the back and forth with the lender, and reviewed the purchase agreement. I was the one who wired the down payment $22,000 from my own savings account, with the understanding, stated clearly to everyone in a group text that I screenshotted and still have, that this would be repaid to me over the following 2 years. The deed had my name on it. My parents' names were on it too, but the mortgage was solely mine because they couldn't qualify. I owned 51%. That detail will matter later. For about 8 months, things were fine. My parents moved in. My mother planted a garden in the back. My father built a small workbench in the garage. Marcus came over on Sundays and ate their food and watched their television and complained occasionally that the house could have been bigger, which I found interesting since he hadn't contributed a single dollar. The first sign that something was shifting came from a cousin of mine in Charlotte. She texted me one afternoon asking if I was doing okay, saying she'd heard I had been really stressed lately and that things were complicated with the family. I didn't know what she was talking about. I wasn't stressed. Things weren't complicated. I texted back, asking where she heard that. She said Marcus had mentioned it at a birthday party she attended. I called Marcus that evening. He said it was nothing, just that he was worried about me, that I seemed overwhelmed managing the house situation. I told him I wasn't overwhelmed. He said, okay. We hung up. But something stayed with me after that call. A low-frequency discomfort I couldn't fully name. A few weeks later, my mother called asking whether we could refinance the house so her name could be the primary on the mortgage. She had been working with a credit repair service, she said, and her score had improved. I told her I was glad to hear that, and I'd look into what the process would involve. She thanked me, and that was that. Except 2 days later, she called again, and this time Marcus was on the call too, which I hadn't been told would happen. And the tone was different. It wasn't a question anymore. It was a presentation. Marcus had apparently spoken to someone he called them a real estate guy, without specifying further, who told him that the easiest solution was for me to simply sign over my portion of the deed and remove myself from the place. Mortgage. I explained, calmly, that it doesn't work that way. You cannot remove yourself from a mortgage simply by signing over a deed. The lender has to approve a refinance. My parents had to qualify independently, and given where their credit still actually was, despite the repair service, that was not a certain outcome. I also explained that I had $22,000 of my own money in this property that had not been repaid. Marcus said, "You knew this was for the family. You didn't do this expecting to get paid back like a bank." I want you to think about that sentence for a moment. I asked him to repeat it because I genuinely wanted to make sure I heard it correctly. He did, word for word. I said I would talk to everyone in person, and we could work out a clear timeline together. He said fine. My mother said fine. We scheduled a dinner for the following Saturday. I drove to Greensboro that Saturday with a printed one-page summary, nothing aggressive, just dates, dollar amounts, the repayment agreement from the original group text, and 2 proposed refinancing timelines depending on my parents' credit outcome. I had a folder. I sat down at the dinner table, the same table I had watched my parents eat at for 23 years, and I set the folder on the surface. Marcus looked at the folder, and then looked at my father, and my father looked at his hands. My mother said she didn't think this needed to be so formal. I said I agreed, which is why I kept it to 1 page. What happened over the next 2 hours is something I have gone over many times in my mind, and I still find it difficult to explain fully. What I can tell you is that by the end of it, I understood something that I had not understood walking in. The narrative had already been written. Not that evening, not even that week. Sometime in the months prior, a version of me had been constructed in conversations I wasn't part of, at gatherings I wasn't told about, and that version was controlling, selfish, someone who had inserted herself into the family finances in order to hold power over them. The $22,000 I had contributed was reframed as a loan she insisted on making conditions about. The deed being in my name was reframed as she made sure to protect herself. My reviewing of documents was reframed as she always has to be in charge of everything. I sat there listening to my brother describe me, and I felt something I can only describe as vertigo. Not anger. Not yet. Just this strange dizziness that comes when the room you thought you were standing in turns out to have different walls than you realized. At one point I said, "When did I tell anyone I wanted to be in charge of everything?" Marcus said, "You didn't have to say it." I drove home that night without finishing dinner. I was very quiet in the car. I put on no music. I just drove the 73 miles back to Raleigh in the dark and sat in my parking garage for about 10 minutes before going inside. I didn't call anyone. I didn't text. I went to bed. 3 weeks passed. My mother texted occasionally regular things, a recipe, a photo of the garden. Marcus didn't contact me. My father called once to ask if I was coming for my mother's birthday the following month, and I said probably. I'd let him know. Then came a Sunday evening, 6 weeks after that dinner, when my phone rang and it was Marcus and I answered, and before I could say anything he said, "We need you to transfer the deed by end of the month. We've talked to a lawyer, and you don't have any real claim here. We're giving you the chance to do this the easy way." I said, "I'll need to review whatever your lawyer sent in writing." He said, "This isn't a negotiation, Claire." I said, "Okay, good night." He called back twice. I didn't answer. The voicemail came the next morning. "We've made a decision as a family. You're not part of this anymore. Don't come to the house. We'll handle things from here." 34 seconds. That's how long it took to tell me I was no longer part of my own family. I played it a third time. Then I set the phone down. Here is what I want you to understand about what happened next. I did not react. I did not call and yell. I did not send a long text explaining my feelings. I did not draft an email. I did not contact my parents to ask if they agreed with what Marcus had said. I did nothing visible at all. What I did was call my attorney. I had a real estate attorney, her name is Patricia, and I have worked with her professionally on a few matters over the years. I called her that morning and told her the situation. I was precise. I gave her the dates, the dollar amounts, the screenshot of the original repayment agreement, the deed structure, the mortgage terms. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" I told her. What I wanted, specifically, was this. I wanted to formally notify my parents and Marcus in writing that I was no longer willing to continue under the current arrangement. I wanted the $22,000 repaid in full within 60 days. And if that repayment did not occur, I wanted to initiate a partition action, a legal process by which a co-owner of a property can force a sale or a buyout when co-owners cannot agree. Patricia said she would draft the letter. It arrived at the Greensboro house 6 days later via certified mail. My phone lit up at 8:47 the morning, then again at 8:49, then 8:50, 8:54, 8:55. My mother, my father, Marcus, a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be my aunt. By noon, I had 43 missed calls. By the following morning, it was 61. I answered none of them. I want to tell you what it feels like to watch your phone ring 61 times over 18 hours and not answer it. People assume it feels powerful. It doesn't, really. It mostly just feels sad. Each time the screen lit up, I saw my mother's name or my father's name, and I thought about the garden she planted and the workbench he built, and I felt the weight of what was happening and what had led to it. I wasn't cold about it. I wasn't enjoying it. I was grieving something even as I was protecting myself, and I think those two things can exist at the same time. The 60-second call I answered. It was my father. He is not a man who says a lot. He has never once in my life told me he loved me using those exact words. He shows it in other ways in showing up, in small repairs he does without being asked, in the way he calls to make sure I got home safe after long drives. When he spoke that morning, his voice was different from any version of it I had ever heard. Quieter. Like something in it had cracked. He said, "I didn't know he was going to say those things to you." I said, "Which things?" He said, "Any of it. The lawyer. The voicemail. I didn't know." I believed him. I want to be honest about that. I believe my father. Which made everything both easier and harder. I said, "Dad, I have $22,000 in that house. My name is on the mortgage. I have been managing this for 4 years. I can't just walk away from that because Marcus decided I should." He said, "I know." I said, "Do you understand what the letter means? What happens if the 60 days pass and nothing changes?" He was quiet. Then he said, "Tell me what you need." That sentence took years off of me. I don't know how else to say it. I told him I needed the repayment agreement honored. I needed Marcus out of any decisions about a property he hadn't contributed to. And I needed, going forward, for conversations about the house to happen between me and my parents directly, not through my brother, as some kind of intermediary with his own agenda. My father said he would talk to my mother. Marcus called 4 more times that day. I still didn't answer. He sent a text that said, "You're destroying this family." I read it, set the phone down, and went for a walk. Here is something I have learned about being the person who holds things together. When you stop holding, everyone notices immediately how much you are doing. Not because they suddenly appreciate it, because the thing starts to fall. And watching it fall is disorienting for people who never thought about the structure at all. Marcus had never once considered what it meant that my name was on that mortgage. He had never thought about what it cost me to wire $22,000 from my savings at 27 years old, or what it meant to be the one fielding calls from the lender, or what it felt like to sit across from my family at a dinner table and be described as the problem. He had only ever thought of me as a resource. And when resources stop cooperating, you try to override them. He couldn't override me. That was the thing he hadn't understood. Over the following 3 weeks, my parents met with a financial advisor and a mortgage broker to understand their actual options. The repayment, all $22,000, came through on day 41, 11 days before Patricia's deadline. My mother called when the transfer went through. She was crying a little. She said she was sorry it took this long. I said I knew. Marcus did not apologize. I did not expect him to. What changed is harder to describe. There was no dramatic scene, no final confrontation, no moment where I stood in a doorway and delivered a closing statement while he had nothing to say. Real life doesn't usually give you that. What happened instead was slower and quieter. The house is still in my parents' names and mine. The mortgage is still mine until they qualify to refinance, which Patricia says could happen in the next 12 to 18 months based on their current trajectory. We have a written agreement now, witnessed and notarized, that outlines exactly what happens at each stage, not because I don't trust my parents, but because documentation is what protects everyone, including them. I went to my mother's birthday dinner. It was smaller than usual. Marcus was there. We did not speak beyond basic acknowledgments. He looked, for the first time in my memory, like someone who understood that something had shifted in a way he couldn't reverse. I didn't feel triumphant about that. I felt tired. My father hugged me when I arrived, which he almost never does. It lasted longer than usual. I think about the voicemail sometimes. 34 seconds. Don't come to the house. We'll handle things from here. And I think about what he expected to happen. Did he think I would panic? Did he think I would come to the house anyway and beg to be let back in? Did he think the version of me he had been describing to other people, controlling, power-hungry, cold, was who I actually was? Because here's what I actually was. I was a 31-year-old woman who had spent 4 years making sure her parents could have a home, who had given up her savings and her credit and dozens of weekends, and who had asked for nothing in return, except that the agreement made at the beginning be honored. That's all. That's the whole of it. The person you count on is not the same as the person you can push around. Sometimes the people closest to you confuse the two. When someone tells you not to come back, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply agree. Set your phone face down on the counter. Call your attorney in the morning. Let the certified letter do the talking. By the time my phone had rung 61 times, I hadn't said a single word. And somehow, for the first time in 4 years, I had been heard. If this story felt familiar to you, if you've ever been the person who holds everything together and then gets told you're the problem, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're new here, welcome to the channel. You found the right place.